It all started because of Emily, my best friend and, as of last Friday, the worst influence in my life. She called me around noon, voice practically dripping with mischief, and said, "Cancel your plans tonight. You're coming with me to something fun." That should have been my first red flag. Emily's definition of fun typically ranged from breaking into abandoned amusement parks to speed dating events that felt more like social experiments. But this time, she added a qualifier that stopped me mid-coffee sip. "It's a swing party." I choked, spluttering caffeine all over my laptop. "Eh, what now?" Emily giggled, her tone more conspiratorial than ever. "Oh, don't be such a prude, Claire. You're single, you're hot, and you've been locked up in your apartment watching Bridgerton reruns for weeks. You need this." I tried every excuse. I had work to do, my hair wasn't cooperating, my soul wasn't prepared. But Emily had a way of dismantling all my defenses with surgical precision. "It's just people having a good time," she said, her voice lilting. "No pressure. Just come and see." By the time she hung up, I found myself staring at my closet, suddenly questioning why I owned exactly 0 cool but low-key outfits for events like this. What does one even wear to a swing party? Google wasn't much help, so I settled on a slinky black dress I'd never worn before, equal parts mystery and nerves. We pulled up to an unassuming house in a quiet neighborhood, its manicured lawn bathed in soft porch light. It looked normal. Too normal. My stomach churned as Emily dragged me to the door. "Relax," she whispered, patting my arm. "No one bites. Unless you ask nicely." The door opened to a man with a megawatt smile, dressed like he'd stepped out of a GQ spread. "Welcome," he said warmly, his voice as smooth as the jazz playing faintly inside. The moment I stepped through the door, the air changed. It was charged, buzzing with an energy I couldn't quite place. The lighting was soft, almost golden, casting flattering shadows on the room's eclectic mix of furniture. Groups of people clustered together, their laughter and murmured conversations blending into the background music. This isn't so bad, I thought. Then Emily leaned close and whispered, "Just wait until you see the real party." At first, it was just a casual social gathering. I clung to a glass of wine like a lifeline, nodding along as Emily introduced me to a parade of names and faces I promptly forgot. Everyone seemed normal. Too normal. I tried to convince myself that I'd been overreacting, that this wasn't going to be the wild night I dreaded. And then I met Ian. He was sitting in the corner of the living room, a quiet observer amid the revelry. Dark-haired, sharp-jawed, with a confidence that made him seem untouchable. When our eyes met, he smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. Emily nudged me toward him, whispering something about getting out of my comfort zone, and before I knew it, I was sitting across from him. "What brings you here?" he asked, his voice low and warm. "Peer pressure," I admitted with a laugh. "And wine. Lots of wine." Ian chuckled, a rich sound that sent a little shiver down my spine. "It's your first time, isn't it? Is it that obvious?" "Not in a bad way," he said. "You look curious, not uncomfortable. That's rare." I wasn't sure what to say, so I sipped my wine and let the moment stretch. His gaze was steady, unflinching, and I felt an odd sense of ease under its weight. The evening blurred into a series of surreal moments. Conversations turned more intimate, laughter more knowing. The house seemed to shift around me, the atmosphere growing heavier, more charged. I felt Ian's hand brush mine, a silent question that sent my heart racing. But then, just as I was starting to find my footing, the air changed again. An older man approached, a stranger whose presence set my nerves on edge. His smile was too wide, his laughter too loud. He leaned in close, his breath hot on my skin, and I felt an instinctive jolt of discomfort. Ian must have noticed, because he immediately shifted, placing himself subtly between us. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, though my heart was still pounding. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. "I need some fresh air," I murmured, standing abruptly. The patio was a blessed escape. Cool night air swept over me, grounding me as I leaned against the railing. I stared out at the garden, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. "Claire," Ian's voice broke the silence, soft and steady. I turned to find him standing in the doorway, a glass of water in his hand. "Thought you might need this." I took it gratefully, my hands trembling slightly as our fingers brushed. "Thanks," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with," he said, his tone careful but firm. "This isn't a test. It's just a night." His words settled over me like a balm, easing the tension in my chest. For the first time all night I felt like I could breathe again. I don't know how long Ian and I stood out there on the patio, the quiet night wrapping around us like a blanket. The hum of the party behind us felt distant, muted, as if it belonged to another world. His presence was steady, grounding, and for a moment I allowed myself to relax. "You're handling this well," he said after a while, leaning against the railing beside me. There was a hint of amusement in his voice, but it wasn't unkind. I laughed, the sound shaky but real. "I don't feel like I'm handling anything. I feel like I'm one awkward moment away from bolting." "You wouldn't be the first," he said, grinning. "But I don't think you will." "Why's that?" "Because you're curious. That's why you came in the first place, right?" I didn't answer, but he wasn't wrong. I wasn't sure what I was looking for when I agreed to come here. Adventure, distraction, maybe just a way to forget how mundane everything had felt lately. But now that I was here, the sheer unpredictability of it all left me spinning. Ian pushed off the railing and offered me his hand. "Come back inside. I'll stay close, make sure no one bothers you." His words were simple, but the way he said them made it feel like a promise. Hesitating for only a moment, I took his hand, his warmth seeping into my palm. The living room was more crowded now, the energy thicker, heavier, like the room itself was alive. Emily spotted me immediately and shot me a knowing grin from across the room. I avoided her gaze, pretending to be engrossed in whatever Ian was saying, though I couldn't tell you what it was. I clung to his presence like a buoy, letting him guide me through the shifting currents of the evening. We ended up near a small group gathered by the fireplace. They were laughing, their voices low but laced with intimacy. One of the women, a striking brunette in a crimson dress, caught my eye and smiled. "You're new," she said, her tone more observation than question. I nodded, suddenly feeling like a deer caught in headlights. "Is it that obvious?" "Just a little," she said, her smile widening. She gestured for us to join the circle, and Ian led me to a spot on the plush rug beside her. "I'm Marissa, by the way." "Claire," I said, my voice a touch too bright. "Don't worry, Claire," she said, leaning closer as though we were old friends. "No one here bites." "Well, unless you ask them to." Her wink was playful, but it sent a nervous flutter through my chest. The group's attention shifted to Ian, and I took the opportunity to observe the room. It felt surreal, people moving together in a way that was both casual and deliberate, the lines between conversation and connection blurring. The air was thick with unspoken invitations, each glance and touch layered with meaning. I wasn't sure how I felt about it. Part of me wanted to retreat to the safety of the patio, but another part, the braver, more reckless part, wanted to stay and see what would happen next. The first real test came not long after. Ian had stepped away to refill our drinks, leaving me with Marissa and the rest of the group. I was laughing at something one of the others had said. A genuine laugh, the first of the night, when a man I hadn't noticed before slid into the space beside me. He was older, probably in his late 50s, with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that lingered a moment too long. "Having fun?" he asked, his voice deep and smooth. I nodded, my smile tightening. "Yeah, it's interesting." "I'm Paul," he said, extending a hand. I shook it out of politeness, though his grip lingered a second longer than it needed to. "First time, huh? Is it that obvious?" I asked, trying to sound light-hearted, but the words came out strained. He chuckled, a low rumble that made my skin crawl. "Don't worry. Everyone's a little nervous their first time. But you'll get the hang of it." I felt a sudden, intense need for Ian's steady presence, but he was still across the room, his back to me. Marissa must have sensed my discomfort because she leaned forward, cutting off whatever Paul was about to say. "Claire," she said, her tone warm but firm, "do you want to come with me to grab some fresh air?" The relief I felt was immediate. "Yeah, that'd be great," I said quickly, standing before Paul could protest. Marissa looped her arm through mine as we walked away. Her grip light but reassuring. "Don't let guys like Paul ruin the night for you," she said softly, glancing over her shoulder to make sure we weren't followed. "He means well, but he doesn't always know when to back off." "Thanks," I murmured, my heart still racing. She smiled, her dark eyes kind. "No problem. Just stick with me or Ian, and you'll be fine." When Ian returned, he immediately noticed the shift in my mood. "Everything okay?" he asked, handing me a glass of wine. "Just adjusting," I said, grateful for the warmth in his gaze. He didn't press, and I appreciated that more than I could say. For the rest of the night, I stayed close to him and Marissa, their presence a shield against the chaos around us. I wasn't sure what I expected when I agreed to come here, but it wasn't this strange mix of exhilaration and vulnerability, laughter and unease. By the time Emily found me again, I was emotionally spent. "Well," she asked, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "What did you think?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, glancing back at Ian, who was deep in conversation with Marissa. "But I think I'm glad I came." And for the first time that night I believed it. I never thought a swing party could feel this surreal. But then again, I didn't think I'd find myself in a room full of people who looked like they should be planning their retirements instead of exploring their freedom. Yet, there I was, clutching a half-empty glass of wine like it was a life raft. Emily, of course, was thriving. She flitted around the room, her laughter echoing above the soft music as she charmed every silver-haired gentleman in sight. Meanwhile, I was doing everything in my power not to bolt for the exit. It wasn't just the age gap, it was the energy. Or rather, the lack of it. Instead of a spicy, mysterious vibe, the atmosphere felt like a slow-motion reunion for the class of 1975. The room hummed with polite small talk and the occasional chuckle, as if everyone was saving their energy for the real festivities. "Relax, Claire," Emily whispered when she finally circled back to me. Her cheeks were flushed, either from the wine or the attention she was soaking up like a sponge. "You're acting like you're at a funeral." "Honestly, it feels like one," I shot back, keeping my voice low. "Did you forget to mention that everyone here remembers Woodstock firsthand?" Emily rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. Age is just a number. Besides, you never know. You might surprise yourself." "Surprise myself how?" "By discovering a sudden fascination with orthopedic shoes and early bedtimes." Emily snorted into her drink, but before she could fire back, a man approached us. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and probably in his late 60s. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, and his cologne was strong enough to nearly knock me over. "Ladies," he said, flashing a smile that revealed startlingly white teeth. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure. I'm Richard." "Emily," she said, her voice sugary sweet as she extended her hand. Then she gestured to me. "And this is Claire. It's her first time." Richard's smile widened as he turned to me. "Ah, a first-timer. Welcome. I hope you're finding the evening enlightening." I forced a smile, resisting the urge to correct him. "It's something, all right." Richard chuckled as if I'd just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. "Well, don't be shy. We're all here to have a good time." I mumbled something non-committal, and thankfully, Emily swooped in to redirect his attention. As they chatted, I slipped away toward the corner of the room, my anxiety bubbling just below the surface. I needed a break. Or a distraction. Or a time machine to take me back to the moment I let Emily talk me into this. The kitchen offered a brief reprieve. It was quieter there, with only a handful of people milling about. I refilled my wine glass, taking a moment to steady myself. But just as I was starting to feel like I could breathe again, I heard a voice behind me. "Not a fan of the crowd?" I turned to find a man leaning casually against the counter. He was younger than most of the guests, maybe mid-40s, but still well above my usual age range. His sharp suit and easy smile gave him an air of confidence, but there was something about him that felt different, less pushy, more genuine. Something like that, I admitted, taking a sip of wine. It's not exactly what I expected. Let me guess, he said, tilting his head. You were hoping for something a little more lively. I laughed despite myself. That obvious. He grinned. You'd be surprised how often I hear that. I'm Sam, by the way. Claire. Well, Claire, he said, raising his glass. Welcome to the slowest swing party in town. I snorted, nearly choking on my wine. At least you're honest. Life's too short for anything else, he said with a shrug. Besides, I think everyone here knows what this is. They're just too polite to say it out loud. For the first time all night, I felt myself relax a little. Sam's dry humor and self-awareness were a welcome change from the forced enthusiasm of the other guests. We chatted for a while, trading sarcastic comments about the evening and laughing more than I had in weeks. But of course my brief moment of peace couldn't last. Emily found me again, dragging Richard and another man in tow. There you are, she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. We were just talking about how you should come join us in the living room. Actually, I started, but Emily cut me off. No excuses. You've been hiding in here long enough. I shot a helpless glance at Sam, who just smiled and gave a small nod. Go on, he said. I'll be around if you need backup. With a deep sigh, I let Emily pull me back into the fray. The living room was even more crowded now, the air thick with warmth and the faint scent of wine and cologne. I tried to stay on the edges, avoiding the more intimate clusters, but Emily was relentless. She introduced me to everyone in sight. Her enthusiasm so contagious that I almost forgot how out of place I felt. Almost. The tipping point came when Richard suggested we join a game in the corner. It's a great way to break the ice, he said, his hand lightly brushing my arm. His touch was harmless, but it still made my skin crawl. I managed a weak smile, desperately searching for an escape route. That's when I saw Sam watching from across the room. He caught my eye and raised an eyebrow as if to say, "Need rescuing?" I didn't hesitate. "Excuse me for a moment," I said to Richard, already moving toward Sam before he could protest. "Didn't take long," Sam said when I reached him, his tone teasing but kind. "Let's just say I've hit my limit." "Fair enough." He gestured toward the door. "Want some fresh air?" "More than anything." The cool night air hit me like a reset button, washing away the stuffy tension from inside. I stepped onto the patio with Sam by my side, clutching my glass of wine like a lifeline. For the first time all evening I could breathe. The muffled hum of the party behind us was a distant echo, a world I no longer wanted to be a part of. Sam leaned against the railing, his easy smile still in place. "So what's the verdict?" he asked, tilting his head toward the house. "Best night of your life." I laughed, a real laugh this time, not the strained kind I'd been faking all night. "Oh, absolutely. I mean, who wouldn't want to spend their Friday night dodging awkward conversations and unsolicited touches from men twice their age?" He grinned. "It's a niche crowd for sure." We stood there in comfortable silence for a while, the faint rustle of the trees and the occasional burst of laughter from inside filling the gaps. I could feel the tension in my shoulders easing, like I'd finally found a tiny pocket of sanity in the chaos of the evening. "You know," Sam said after a moment, his tone more serious, "you don't have to stay. If you're not having fun, there's no rule saying you have to tough it out." I hesitated, staring into my wine. He was right, of course. There was no reason for me to stay. No obligation to endure the awkwardness or force myself to enjoy something I clearly wasn't built for. But a tiny part of me still felt guilty, like leaving early would somehow make me a failure. "I don't want to bail on Emily," I said finally, though the words sounded hollow even to me. Sam gave a small shrug. "Emily's a grown woman. She'll survive. Besides," he added with a sly grin, "I think she's doing just fine in there." He wasn't wrong. The last I'd seen of Emily, she was practically glowing, surrounded by admirers and basking in the attention like a queen on her throne. She wouldn't even notice if I left. And yet I hesitated. "Let me guess," Sam said, his voice cutting through my thoughts. "You don't want to hurt her feelings." I nodded, feeling a bit like a child caught in a lie. He laughed softly, shaking his head. "Claire, no offense, but you're way too nice for your own good. Sometimes you've just got to put yourself first." His words hit harder than I expected. Maybe it was the wine, or the exhaustion, or the lingering frustration from how the night had unfolded, but something in me cracked. "You're right," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I don't want to be here. I didn't want to come in the first place. And I know Emily means well, but this isn't me." Sam's expression softened. "Then let's get you out of here." 10 minutes later, we were in Sam's car, the glow of the house fading in the rearview mirror. I hadn't even bothered to tell Emily I was leaving. I figured I'd deal with her wrath tomorrow. For now, all I cared about was putting as much distance as possible between myself and that party. Sam glanced over at me as he drove, his expression calm but amused. "You okay?" I let out a long breath, leaning back against the seat. "Better now." He chuckled. "Good." Because I was starting to think I'd have to stage a full-blown rescue operation. I rolled my eyes but couldn't help smiling. "You're not far off." The drive was quiet after that, but it wasn't the awkward kind of silence I'd come to dread. It was peaceful, like the calm after a storm. By the time Sam pulled up outside my apartment building, I felt like I could finally think straight again. "Thanks for the lift," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. "And for everything." "Any time," he said, his smile warm and genuine. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Next time Emily tries to drag you to one of these things, run in the opposite direction." I laughed, nodding. "Deal." That night, as I curled up on my couch in my comfiest pajamas, I couldn't help replaying the evening in my head. The awkward introductions, the stilted conversations, the overwhelming sense that I didn't belong. It all felt so absurd now, like a bad dream I'd finally woken up from. But mixed in with the chaos were a few bright spots. Sam's dry humor, the relief of escaping the crowd, the strange sense of clarity that had come from walking away. Maybe the night hadn't been a total disaster after all.